Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Thank you for joining me as we delve into the dark together. I present to you Southern Fried Murder, written by Rhonnie Fordham. Enjoy. Call me tasteless, but I enjoy running Southern Fried Murder. Growing up, I loved horror movies, especially slashers, but as I got older, I became more drawn to true crime, to the real-life monsters walking among us. Like most people, I was instantly drawn to the sensationalized Bundy and Dahmers of the world, but the local cases scared me more. The murders and vicious crimes that happened in my neck of the woods here in the American South, the ones I covered in my blog. Born and raised in Albany, Georgia, I lived far from the mean streets of Chicago or New York, but that didn't mean my home state and the southeastern region didn't have our fair share of horrifying psychopaths. I was drawn to many cases, ranging from the Atlanta child murderers to the Woolfolk Massacre. As I got closer to my 30s, I put my English degree to good use, and instead of cranking out novels that barely sold, I delved deeper into blogging. And while I wasn't the most popular, I knew I had my own niche right here in my own backyard. The Deep South's most terrifying murders. Only I took it another step forward. I visited all the crime scenes. Whether it was the FSU Chi Omega sorority house Ted Bundy attacked in Tallahassee, Florida, or the sites where the 16th Street Baptist Church in Alabama was bombed by a racist Klansman, I explored all the spots I could. As a result, the site got more successful with all my video and photo uploads. There was something to be said about visiting such sites. Sometimes they were pretty, sometimes they were sketchy, but they were always eerie, even the ones that didn't have paranormal rumors attached to them. On Southern Fried Murder, I could flex my literary talents while also getting to travel. The combo of writing and these experiences also contributed to the betterment of my mental health, especially after the recent end of a 4-year relationship. But what I liked most was that I could stay local. I made decent cash while doing what I loved and while being near my mom and dad. I didn't have to move anywhere too far off or do a soul-sucking job with soul-sucking hours in order to live my version of the American dream. That being said, I had my haters. Certainly, dealing with them was no easy task when I was single, and the only true support system I had were my baby boomer parents. But I survived the insults and morons accusing me of crass exploitation. Considering the fascination I had with the subject, nothing could bother me. I genuinely enjoyed what I did, and even more, I enjoyed learning about forgotten cases or legends in each small southern town. If anything, I was bringing a spotlight to these tragedies. I was creating a legacy with which they'd be remembered forever. But there was one site, the holy grail for Southern Fried Murder and all things Georgia true crime, the Arnold family murder house. These were sickening, senseless murders, ones without any real rhyme or reason, but were no less terrifying. Back in the late 1960s, 2 brothers and their wives were murdered one by one in their little farmhouse on an ideal morning that turned into an intense bloodbath. Both Mike and Sean Arnold were living in the home they inherited from their deceased parents for the last decade. Mike's wife, Annie, and Sean's wife, Elizabeth, were just as hard-working and wholesome. In fact, the 4 of them worked hard to preserve the Arnold's farm's decent, albeit modest, farming business. While only in their early 30s, the couples put off raising children in favor of building their savings. There was a responsibility, a maturity in them quite uncommon for young couples in the small town they lived in. Above all, the Arnolds seemed like good people, honest folk from what I understood. Granted, I hadn't read much about them or seen many of their photos. All my information gleaned from what I'd read in brief blurbs about them in all the books and articles about the case. I'd say there was nothing flashy about the family or the small farmhouse they lived in, but that still didn't stop the Katz brothers from ambushing them. The horror started around 11 a.m. on a peaceful workday. Ted and Bruce Katz, John Passman, and Benjamin Jones, all of whom were prison runaways from Atlanta, rode down Lackey Road, a dirt road right on the outskirts of town. They saw no houses, nothing but cornfields and cotton fields. That is, until they stumbled upon the Arnold farm. Running on empty, the convicts had no choice. At first, their luck looked to be perfect when they saw not only no other cars in the driveway, but also a gas pump parked right beside a pine tree. Out in the summer heat, the group got to work on stealing gas, but quickly realized the pump didn't work. And as they started to sweat, a panic set in once they saw a pickup hurtling towards them. Mike Arnold was on break. The convicts made up their minds right then and there. With nowhere to run and no escape vehicle, they watched Mike step out of the pickup, Mike confused by what they wanted. As Bruce Katz kept him occupied with lies, Ted withdrew his firearm and shot Mike right between the eyes. The oldest of the group at 32 years old, Ted was a natural-born leader. Ted was also the strongest and handsomest between him and Bruce, albeit both brothers were rather muscular, with some college education. Ted was also the one who pushed for the group to stay put. At Ted's command, the others hid Mike Arnold's body out back behind a barn. Then they busted inside the home, eating the leftovers and drinking whatever beer was in the fridge. The convicts felt invincible at this point. They'd conquered a new home, a place to lie low for quite a while considering its sheer desolation. Only none of them knew how big the Arnold family was. A little over an hour later, Annie Arnold drove up to the scene. She parked her pickup right next to her husband's. Her curiosity and concern carried her right up to that front door. Bruce, John, and Benjamin all panicked, but Ted didn't. As Annie entered the trailer and confronted the killers, again, Ted's brother and comrade struggled against her anger. John and Benjamin, each of them only 21, especially crumbled. Benjamin a wiry kid with glasses and hair down to his shoulders. John, an African-American who, like Benjamin, was also a frail hippie. He and John were both serving similar light sentences for marijuana possession. Ted knew neither of them were going to step up. Moving like a stealthy assassin, Ted snuck up behind Annie and wrapped a stocking around her neck. He stared down into her horrified eyes as Annie squirmed. She didn't have a chance. None of her punches landed. Her gasping became more and more painful. During the trial, everyone involved said Ted toyed with her, extending the long, slow death as long as he could before suffocation finally settled in. The second death of the day only resulted in a more sickening confidence that spread throughout the gang. At this point, they didn't bother burying the bodies, but left Mike and Annie out to rot in the sun. Their corpses positioned side by side for an above-ground, conjoined grave. The group got more adventurous, so much so that they had no interest in leaving at this point. Ted's sadistic confidence drifted into Bruce, John, and Benjamin, helping them become a rabid wolf pack. Together, they were more than ready once Elizabeth and Sean came home that evening. The killers saved their most brutal murders for last. This time, Ted made the others do the dirty work. He held Sean in his arms as he made Bruce slit his throat. Ted made him do it slowly while a weeping Elizabeth watched. Restrained by John and Benjamin, Elizabeth stayed at the mercy of the killers. Elizabeth was forced to see her slaughtered husband hit the floor in a pool of blood. Supposedly, steam practically rose up off the blood due to that long, hot summer. Under Ted's sickening spell, the other men turned their attention toward Elizabeth. In that farmhouse of horror, they sexually assaulted her in the living room. These monsters did so, while she lied in Sean's blood, while Sean's dead body was a mere few feet away from them, and while her brother and sister-in-law's corpses rotted outside. Such a reprehensible act was one that a true crime junkie like myself had trouble reading. So much so that when Ted finally had John shoot Elizabeth 5 times in the stomach and face, her death almost seemed like a mercy kill. Regardless of the carnage, Ted had the runaways stay at the Arnold farm for a few more days. They ignored the stifling sun and the way the weather made those bodies stink. But soon enough, their need for Florida and escape won out. They stole Sean's Ford truck and made their way out on the dirt road and then on to Highway 27. One of the creepiest parts about the case was what would have happened if the 4 murderers weren't so dumb. Later on that week, friends and family discovered the disturbing crime scene on the Arnold farm and a manhunt ensued. But I still couldn't help but think, what if they hadn't stuck with Sean's truck so long? After all, there were no witnesses. Maybe at some points when they were away from Ted's leadership, one of the younger convicts would have confessed. But when? However, some justice did prevail. Ted and the others were caught down in Tallahassee and later tried and convicted in Macomb, Georgia. Ted deservedly got the death penalty. The sinister smile at his sentencing arguably the most iconic image from the entire case. Meanwhile, the other killers got life without parole. Over the decades, Ted was executed via lethal injection, and John and Benjamin passed away in prison. But from what I understood, Bruce Katz is still alive and well in the Atlanta State Penitentiary. Bruce is well past 80 years old. To the state's collective relief, he will never get out. The Arnold murders were horrible. Hell, they still are after 50 years. But what I found most stunning was that these murders, one of the largest and scariest mass murders in Georgia history, occurred in Bainbridge, my parents' hometown. These murders happened less than an hour away from me. I've been to Bainbridge many times, obviously. After my parents' divorce, my dad moved back there, so I made my fair share of visits to see him and play cards with our poker buddies. But ever since I'd begun Southern Fried Murder and delved more into the Arnold murders, I'd become more interested in learning more about this heinous crime, particularly visiting the crime scene itself. To Bainbridge's credit, they never shied away from murders that were essentially a part of the community's DNA for over half a century. There was no way Bainbridge could ignore it, not with the amount of press and coverage such a crime creates. Rather than hide, Bainbridge chose to confront the horror head-on, and in a classy move I had nothing but respect for, Bainbridge had a glorious memorial for the Arnolds placed downtown, right in the heart of Willis Park. Amidst the gazebos and antique shops, there stood the large marble monument. The plaque on it was clear, an emotional tribute to the Arnold family, both heartfelt and sincere. In a town like Bainbridge in 2021, much less in the 60s, such a tragedy sent shockwaves through every church, bank, and downtown festival this town had to offer. Never mind that everyone knew everybody, but hell, most of the Bainbridgeites were related to one another in one way or the other. My dad, one of the few not related to the Arnolds. The monument included many impressive engravings, a large tractor, and a heavenly sky amongst them. The memorial also mentioned how beloved and great the Arnold family was, and how they now resided in heaven. There was no mention of their killers or any explicit details of the family's deaths. This was strictly for the victims. Needless to say, I'd traveled to that spot several times. Only I'd never seen the actual crime scene. Whether it was through Bainbridge censorship or the Arnold family's understandable wishes, no actual Arnold house address was available online. This left me with few options for tracking down the spot, or even any information on whether or not the house was still standing. No one on the internet was eager to talk about it, and any local historian I reached out to never replied. Not even my father, arguably my biggest Southern Fried Murder fan, could give me a clue. But granted, by the time the murders happened, he was off in Atlanta for college. So when I went to visit Bainbridge once more in June, I got to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, spend time with my dad, and further investigate the Arnold crime site. The time with Pop went great. We had yet another epic drunk poker game, followed by yet another drunken YouTube marathon of all things Beatles and Bruce Springsteen. But after all that, curiosity compelled me. Where the hell was the Arnold farmhouse? Certainly, all my usual resources offered me nothing. My latest lead from a mysterious other blog resulted in me ending up at a cornfield on the edge of town. Maybe not too far off base, but way too vague for me to take a selfie at, or better yet, publish an entry over. Again, I ended up back at the memorial, defeated. As much to my pleasant, albeit morbid surprise, I saw where the anniversary of the crime was that particular day. June 29th, 1967. The sun never felt more stifling, yet I still caught a chill. That night, I retreated to Gretna, Florida, where a poker room awaited me. One that was a mere 20 miles away from my dad's house. At 11 p.m., I'd already lost a couple hundred on the Hold'em tables before I made my way over to Pai Go. Holding my 5th Miller Lite, I was either going to stay all night to sober up or phone a friend for an impromptu ride home, in which I'd pay them back. But screw it, I had to get smashed if it was going to be one of those loser nights. So I sat down amidst a small crew of 1 dealer, 1 banker, and 1 other player. With a meager $100 stack in front of me, my skinny frame leaned over, my green eyes scanning the dealer's slick shuffle. The other player on my left seemed like the chill, country type, a tall, skinny guy in his 50s, his angular features not hurting his handsomeness. "Is the table hot?" I quipped to him. Smirking at the guy, waved me off. "Hell no, but you came at a good time," his southern drawl replied. "Why's that?" "Can't get any worse. I've already lost $5,000. Jesus, I thought internally. But it turned out the guy was right. Over the next hour, I proceeded to have more drinks, while the stranger and I must have cleared over $500 each. Sure, we were in the dim, sterile lighting of Gretna rather than the spotlight of Vegas. We were amidst a casual sea of regulars rather than the swarm of tourists and celebrities the bigger rooms offered, but I was having fun. This place felt like home. Similar to Bainbridge, the Grenta poker room offered familiar comfort. Everybody knew everybody, so much so that the current dealer, Amanda, was one of my Facebook friends and one who was well aware of my Southern Fried blog. At the table, Amanda and I got to talking about my latest plans, the latest scary sights on my never-ending road trip. When I mentioned how hard it was to find the Arnold family house, we shared a laugh until the other player looked right at me. His sharp glower instantly made my dimples disappear. "You're really trying to find that house, huh?" he remarked, an unusually cold detachment in his tone. Yeah, I nervously stated. "Even with what happened there?" the man sneered. His meat-hook hands readjusted his FSU baseball cap. "You got some kind of sick hobbies, huh?" Put on the spot, I turned to Amanda, but she too was watching. Amanda stayed at a professional silence, quiet and a bit uneasy as she got to work on dealing the next hand. "That whole family got wiped out, you know," the man continued. "Yes, sir," I said, my chill vibes and humor long gone. I motioned toward Amanda. Like I was telling her, I just check out places like that for a blog I write. I don't mean to disrespect, or... "Yeah, well," the man fixated his stone stare on me. "Mike and Sean were my older brothers." My blood froze. Hell, I think I saw Amanda's tan skin turn a ghostly white. "So yeah, it just bothers me when people take it lightly," the man said. He shrugged with a war-woven weakness. "Not saying that you are, but just folks in general. I didn't say anything. I decided a funeral silence was the best response. Especially on the anniversary, the man added as he looked down at his cards. To my relief, there wasn't so much disdain as a somber streak in his mood. I looked down at my own Paigao hand, the distraction welcome, albeit not welcome enough, judging by the king-high Paigao I'd just gotten. That's why this is the first time I come out here in a while, the man said, just to get my mind off it. Yes, sir, I faced him, but I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring it up like that. Nah, son, you're fine, the player said, his voice somewhat friendlier. But I tell you what, he turns toward me. I can take you out there, if you really want to go. Struggling under his stoic spotlight, I hesitated. I mean, you really don't have to. I'm sorry about your loss. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. You're not, the man quickly replied. He laid his 7 cards on the table. I can tell you mean well. He gave me a weak smile. I think it'd only help preserve my family's legacy. Keeping his cool, he motioned over at Amanda. Like you and her were saying. With a trembling hand, I laid my own cards down. I try to. As long as you're not one of those leeches making clickbait. The man's lingering smile reassured me. No, sir, I replied with a half grin. I wasn't lying either. I was a writer more so than a blogger, but definitely not a reporter. I usually explain what happened and provide some background on the tragedies. Yeah, he really does, Otis, Amanda vouched for me. Both Otis and I faced her, reaching for Otis's cards. Amanda nodded towards me. Henry's been coming here for a long time. His blogs are good. Thank you, Amanda. The Southern Fried Murderer writer in me screamed with joy. I see, Otis replied. He stuck a hand out towards me. Otis Arnold. For a moment, the name, especially that last name, unsettled me. But then, I gladly completed the exchange. Henry, and thank you. Otis nodded at the 7th beer I held, just as the waitress placed my 8th one on the poker caddy next to me. I figured you could use the ride anyway. Fair enough, I said, as Amanda and I chuckled. Of course, Otis and I lost that hand. Amanda just got hot. Once Otis and I lost about 100 each, we both knew our time was up. Lady Luck could be pretty temperamental. Before I left with Otis in his red F-150, I talked things over with Amanda. I knew Otis looked familiar, and I'd seen him around on the poker tables the past couple of years, but still I had to be sure he wasn't a nut. To the relief of both my anxiety and creative drive, Amanda did confirm Otis's last name was Arnold, and that he was a pretty good dude from what she knew. Obviously, I kept my cell phone on standby, Amanda's number and 911 at the ready should this midnight road trip turn into a horror film. The plan was for Otis to bring me back after visiting the house, then I could just crash on a card table for a few hours until I sobered up enough for the 20-minute ride back home. Before we left, Otis let me bring a few of the Bud Ices I had in my trunk, then we were off. Along the way, Otis reassured me it was a quick 15-minute drive. If anything, he was chattier now than he ever was on the veldt. There was talk of Paigao strategies, but once we made our way from the paved highways to the back dirt roads of Bainbridge, Georgia, Otis became more introspective, much more reflective. Yeah, once it happened in 1967. We stayed in the city, but sure as hell stayed far away from that neighborhood. Otis rambled on, vague emotion entering his drawl. These back roads. Like a lethargic tour guide, he waved off at an abandoned, overgrown lot we passed by, a stray sight amidst the many cornfields and forests we were riding through. They bring too much pain, especially for Mama. Hanging onto my Bud Ice, I gazed out the windshield at what was a starless, soulless night. No full moon in sight. But regardless of the excitement, I felt an uncomfortable dread, one that I did my best to suppress. Otis kept the AC and the radio on low, but I wasn't going to complain. Not when he was the tour guide leading me to a site I'd been chasing for over a decade. "Do you still come here?" I asked. I looked over at Otis as we passed an abandoned trailer. "You don't have to answer if it's too personal. Otis waved me off. "Nah, just sometimes I come out here." He faced me. "You can't ever forget, you know. Something like that, no one will forget." I nodded and took another swig. Otis deserved the moment of silence. "But how old were you?" I asked. "I'm guessing you were much younger." "I was only 10. He made a left turn. The dirt road took a dive. There was a bump that I felt, but Otis sure didn't even flinch. But I still remember. I was close to my brothers, Elizabeth and Annie. They were pretty girls, but real nice. They all were." He cracked a nostalgic grin. "I was like a little brother to all of them. They'd take me to the county fair with them, the stores, even to Old White's Bridge on Halloween." "That sounds fun," I chuckled. "Yeah." Otis' smile disappeared as he returned to a somber state. "When Mama and Daddy passed, I was only 5, so Sean and Mike, they wanted to help raise me. They wanted me to be raised like my daddy raised them to be. Good, honest people. To be the great men that they were." Now we were in a darker space. Woods loomed all around us, the towering trees hiding whatever lurked out there. The nocturnal creatures were so loud, the owls and whatever else doing those eerie howls. I could hear them over the popular country music channel Otis had on. But I was mostly living with my aunt and uncle at the time. Otis went on. He shook his head, about the only thing he could do to stop the tears from forming. Even the darkness couldn't disguise his emotions. "If I'd been there with Mike and Sean, I guess they'd have killed me too." I took another uneasy sip. "Of course, in a way, they already did," Otis continued, his voice cracking, his hands gripping tighter to the steering wheel, his glower stuck on the endless dirt road sprawling before us. "They killed my entire family in one day." I lowered the can. Sympathy, rather than the usual fascination with fear and horror, shot through me. "I'm sorry." All I could muster out in what was fast becoming an uncomfortable car ride. "You know, there are some days," Otis told me, "some nights where I just..." In one quick swipe, he knocked off the tears he wouldn't dare show. "I just think about ending it all. I think about just taking myself out and joining them." "Hey, don't..." I started. "No, just..." Otis waved a hand towards me. "Just hear me out." His gaze drifted back to the road. "It's not easy when you realize the cast boys, Passman and Jones, all those monsters won. They didn't even get the chair." A sickened sneer escaped Otis. "They beat us. They took away everything I had in life. My family. They made us into freak shows." He threw a flustered hand up. "All those reporters and morons obsessed with those murders. They never once cared about my family." Trying to intervene, I put the beer in the cup holder. "But what about the memorial?" Otis just scoffed. I mean, it's pretty nice. I struggled to reassure. Bainbridge made it really pretty. It's a nice tribute. His glare lingering, Otis stared on at the road. It ain't bringing them back. Caught between the nerves and an empathy I wasn't sure how to express, I felt myself recoiling further back in the seat. I turned my attention toward the windshield, my heart crushed by Otis's monologue, this outpouring of feeling he probably hadn't shared since that fateful day. I spent all my life trying to move on, Otis said. I blamed myself for not moving on at first, for not getting over it like everybody else. But how can I? He hit a momentary silence. It's nearly impossible. Up ahead, I saw the trees give way to a dirt driveway on the road. Security lights beckoned us like heavenly beams in this heart of darkness. This far out in isolated Georgia, I knew we were close. Otis hit his right blinker. They stay in my mind all the time. They're in my heart, my soul. I just hope they're okay. He looked over at me as he slowed down. Wherever they are. Before I knew it, Otis had pulled into the driveway. His navigation was smooth, even if the constant bumps spilled some Bud Ice on the floor. To my relief, Otis waved the accident off. He was too focused, too intent. And soon, I saw why. A decrepit wooden post held a hanging metal sign. Black, hand-painted letters from yesteryear spelled out, Friendship United Methodist Church. The church itself stood tall and Gothic. The long cross, standing at the very top, was a gargoyle glaring down upon Otis's F-150. Regardless of the church's age, the building itself wasn't dilapidated. Its stark white paint turned it into an eternal ghost, haunting the outskirts of Bainbridge, Georgia. Only no congregation was walking through those doors anytime soon. Not when the windows were boarded up, and a large wooden bar barricaded the front door. I just didn't know if this was to keep trespassers from breaking in, or to keep bad vibes and spirits trapped inside. The signs, letters, and the entire church would have been impossible to see had it not been for those bright security lights glowing behind Friendship United Methodist. Surely the lights and their towering poles were there to further discourage teenagers from chasing scares. But they sure didn't faze Otis. He put the truck in park. In one quick glance, I saw trees surrounding us in what was a church clearing amidst this deep, vast forest. Once I hopped out, I saw stray cornfields scattered about across the street. Most of the crops appeared withered from the agonizing heat. The dirt road hadn't looked traveled in years, the tall grass around us having no tire marks, no cigarette butts, or empty beer bottles from those brave enough to come out to this spectral scene. No sounds were heard save for my own heartbeat. Otis and I were alone. So, is it out here? I asked Otis. I turned towards him. Otis taking his time getting out of the vehicle. Yeah. Otis pointed out the windshield, out toward the security lights. It's behind the church. It's abandoned, you know. Smiling, he took the key out of the ignition. For obvious reasons. Gotcha. I forced a smile, even if I wasn't drunk enough to revel in Otis's dry sense of humor. His stilted sense of humor, that is. Growing restless and desperate for another beer, I fidgeted outside, still waiting for Otis in the hot night. It's pretty quiet, I commented. Oh, I know, Otis responded. It always is. He pointed me toward the church. Just go on and way over there. I gotta get something real quick. Following his command, I nodded. After all, Why piss off the designated driver? I shut the door and staggered through the weeds and humidity. Stopping a few feet away from the church's brick front steps, I looked back at the truck. Otis was now making his way towards me. Relieved, I wiped sweat off my brow-swooped bangs. How far away is it? Otis motioned me off towards a small pathway leading behind the church. Each of the stepping stones were more vivid the closer they got to the lights. "Right over there," was all Otis said. Most people wouldn't have followed him. Maybe sober I wouldn't have. But my curiosity won out. The whole point of this journey did. Southern fried murder and all my writing dreams compelled me. I followed Otis out toward the back. Beneath all the security lights lurked a graveyard. The church cemetery was full of grave markers and headstones, all of them ranging from pristine to decrepit. There were rows and rows of Friendship United's eternal residents. The graves extended from the overgrown lawn all the way to the forest in the very back. I only saw dead flowers. The tall pines full of Spanish moss were the most recent mourners. In the hot midnight air, I caught another chill. "What the hell is that?" I asked. I watched Otis lumber past me. "Where the hell's the house?" Keeping his cool, Otis waved me after him. "It's behind the cemetery." He gave me a reassuring grin. "What the hell'd you expect behind a country cemetery?" I couldn't argue when he was exactly right, so I caught up to him, letting Otis lead us out closer toward the forest. The security lights illuminated the increasing decay of each passing grave marker, and the lights started to fade the closer we got to the forest and its valley of mystery. "It's right behind here in these woods," Otis added. Soon, we got well out of eyeshot of the lights, but I still recognized graves on the edge of the cemetery. Border graves that had been long forgotten, long been neglected, and it was right here that Otis came to a sudden stop. "Otis?" I said nervously. I watched Otis just stand there. His stare was pointed straight down, his hands right at his sides. "Where's the house?" I reached out and grabbed his arm. Otis turned and faced me. "It's right here," he yelled, a fire flowing in his veins. Otis pointed straight at the closest grave, the one right in front of us. "There's the house, Henry." I followed his gaze. The large grave marker was pretty from what I could tell. There were angel engravings, pretty flower imagery, and a large state of Georgia carving that stood out amongst the collection of cracks and dirt covering the marble. This far out, though, the lighting was sparse, but the marker had several names that were all too clear. Their last name especially. Arnold. The chills I felt earlier intensified. I felt myself shake even though I was still sweating. "I bet you didn't even know where it was," I heard Otis hurl at me. And he was right. I didn't know Annie, Mike, Elizabeth, and Sean shared the same plots, much less know where their graves even were. I'd never come out here before. I'd never bothered researching the family's final resting place. This moment brought clarity. A sobering reality settled in. I felt tears form. All the times I spent studying the Katz brothers and seeing their pictures flickered through my mind, and through the sad self-introspection, I realized I wasn't sure just what the Arnold family looked like. Hell, I wasn't even sure what color their hair was, what their smiles looked like, how attractive they were. I had no idea. "None of y'all cared about this part," I heard Otis say, his voice weighed down by grief. Finally, I forced myself to face up. Weeping, Otis angrily waved me towards the pitiful grave. "You all know about the murders, but not this," he said. bitterness the only thing holding up his yell. "You want the murders?" Again and again, he waved at the Arnold grave for emphatic, emotional emphasis. "But he didn't care about them. I know y'all don't." "I'm sorry," I said. The sad sights made me struggle. My body just kept trembling. Otis didn't respond to me. Instead, he looked down at the marker as he took a few steps closer to it. His steps soft and weak. Sobbing, I ran a hand through my hair. I didn't know. Otis still didn't reply. He stared straight on at the grave, confronting a tragic past that haunted him to this very day. "I didn't know they were out here," I said. I shook my head, giving Otis all the space he needed. "I'm sorry. I know the whole thing's just terrible. It's terrible." The silent Otis held his head up and gazed off at the forest. He looked lost in thought, a most eerie contemplation. I started to approach him. "Hey," I started. Before I could get any further, Otis reached towards his waistband and pulled out a firearm. I came to an uneasy stop. The pistol froze me dead in my tracks. Fear jolted my nerves. "It's too much," Otis said, his voice almost a whisper amidst such weeping. He held the pistol tightly as he returned his focus back to the grave. "I can't do it anymore." Now I knew Otis never intended to take me to the house or whatever that 50-year-old crime scene had become. He had this plan all along, this compulsion. A final car ride that was both poetic and violent. Otis started to put the pistol to his temple while his eyes remained on the marker. "I'm sorry, y'all," he said to his family. "Wait!" I cried. Snapping out of my scared paralysis, I ran straight towards Otis. I stumbled through the grass. The moment the gun touched Otis's flesh, more fright struck me. The moment his finger touched the trigger, my panic intensified. But I got there just in time. I lunged out and tackled Otis. My hand pushed his arm back just as a gunshot roared through the night. Together, we hit the ground. Both of us were in tears. Both of us were alive. I turned to see Otis's gun lying on top of the Arnold tombstone, the pistol well out of reach. Deep down, I was just glad it was the weapon rather than Otis himself being added to the grave. "Mike, Sean," I heard his voice sob. "I'm sorry." I looked down at Otis. Like a scared child, he stayed cowered in the cemetery's high grass, his eyes shut, his body shivering. The teardrops kept rolling down. "I couldn't go on," Otis said, carrying on his conversation with ghosts. "I miss y'all. Christ, I miss y'all." Unsure what to do, I squeezed Otis's shoulder. Amidst all the anxiety and adrenaline, I offered a supportive touch. I tried, anyway. "It's all right," I said. Otis opened his eyes. "They know you love them, man," I said to Otis, somehow keeping my voice calm, or at least sounding calm. "They know." Leaning up, Otis then wrapped an arm around me. I hugged him back. There was nothing romantic, nothing familial. The embrace was only brought about by that necessary human component in times like these. Companionship. I reassured Otis as best I could. Soon, we both stopped crying. Otis went on to tell me more about his brothers and their wives. I was a willing audience, my questions actually driven by an interest in the victims rather than an interest in the evil. During this banter and budding friendship, I knew I'd gotten my newest entry for Southern Fried Murder, an account on the incredible lives of the Arnolds. How nice they were, how they worked hard to maintain their Bainbridge business, and how much the Arnolds genuinely cared about family. I knew I had a new series on my hands as well, a spotlight for other victims and a chance to honor their legacies beyond indulging in their autopsy reports. "Thanks, Henry," Otis would go on to tell me, as we held on to one another, his southern accent back to full strength. "No," I replied. "Thank you." Otis took me back to Gretna around 2 a.m., but that was far from the last time I saw him. After all, I could always use a designated driver for the card room, and my dad and I could always use another player for those house games.